Hi everyone, you're very welcome back to Gript Media. I'm your host Maria Mains. Isabel Vaughan-Spruce is the leader of the 40 Days for Life campaign in Birmingham in the UK. She was praying silently outside a closed abortion facility in Birmingham on the 4th of December. She wasn't blocking the entrance or doing anything obstructive, but admitted when approached by police that she may be praying silently in her head. When she admitted to this, police arrested her and charged Isabel with violating a public space protection order and committing, quote, anti-social behaviour. Isabel was last month cleared of all 4 charges against her. However, despite being vindicated, she was arrested again just this week for engaging in silent prayer and was told by police that praying near the abortion facility was an offence. Isabel Vaughan-Spruce joins us now. Isabel, it's great to have you with us. Would you be able to just give us a brief introduction, just a little bit about yourself? I know that you are prominent in the UK's pro-life movement. You're the co-chair of the March for Life UK over there. Would you just tell us a bit about yourself and this work that you've been involved in?
Sure, yeah. So as you said, I'm co-director of March for Life UK, but before we ever got involved in March for Life, I was praying outside abortion centres, and I've been doing that for probably around 20 years. So started off just joining a few other like-minded people who were praying outside an abortion centre nearest to me. And I ended up forming a 40 Days for Life group from that, probably about 10, 12 years ago in Birmingham in England. So I've been running that since then. Twice a year we hold 40 Days for Life campaigns. So that's something that I do, as well as obviously holding March for Life and the events associated with March for Life.
And what do you actually do when you go outside the abortion centres? Is it mainly, do you take the sort of focus of prayer, or would you be talking to women who are going in there to have abortions?
It's a really good question, and actually it's just so nice to be able to answer that, because so often people have a preconceived idea of what happens. Yeah. And it's nice to be able to just share what really does happen. So with our campaign, we have people go in groups of 2 or 3, and they would stand near the abortion centre, just quietly saying their prayers, and they would have some leaflets of help that they would offer to anyone going into the abortion centre. Now, we personally don't have any posters at all. We never had any outside the abortion centre where we're praying. Obviously, I know some groups do. So we're just literally 2 or 3 people standing there quietly saying our prayers. And if a woman or a couple are going into the abortion centre, we would either say, you know, is there any help we can offer you, or would you like a leaflet? Sometimes women will just walk on by and not say anything, and then that's the end of the conversation. Sometimes they would say no, or turn down the offer. Again, that would be the end of the conversation. But there's a fair few women who would stop and say, you know, what help can you offer? Or you know, what's this about? And a conversation starts. And we've had many, many women who have decided to continue their pregnancy because we've been able to offer them a reasonable alternative. Whereas before they maybe felt they didn't really have any options. I mean, I can think of well over 100 women who've accepted our help just over a period of a few years when we were counting. Obviously, I don't generally keep a tally chart, but we've had many women, many couples who have come back and shown us their babies, and you know, we're still part of their lives, which is an incredible blessing.
And I think it's interesting as well, because at a time where there's such a crackdown on pro-life people outside abortion centres and facilities, they're still determined to return and to go back and to do the work. So clearly there are, I mean, despite what a lot of people may think, there are fruits that you've seen from this.
Exactly. And this is why we feel it's so important to do it. We see those results. We see the changes that it can make in somebody's life. Women who really felt there was no other options open to them, and people who call themselves pro-choice surely should appreciate that there should at least be a choice available to these women. Many of the women that we were talking to were women who'd had their initial appointment, their consultation, or their so-called pre-abortion counselling, although they might not describe it like that. But they'd been into the abortion centre, hadn't felt that they were offered any reasonable alternatives there. Sometimes they'd even had the first set of abortion pills. But as I say, when they were shown that there was support available to them, they actually wanted their pregnancy. It wasn't the pregnancy, it wasn't the baby that they thought was the problem, but it was other issues going on in their life, maybe relationship difficulties, maybe financial difficulties, maybe accommodation problems which ultimately wouldn't be solved by the abortion. They'd still be going back to an abusive or a coercive relationship. They'd still be going back to the financial difficulties or the poor accommodation they were living in. But when we could get involved, we can actually help that, and they'd often be much better off than they were to start with, which, as I say, it's a privilege to be involved in people's lives like that. But it's just a shame that every woman isn't offered these alternatives.
Isabel, would you talk us through, please, the events of the 4th of December? This was the day you were praying outside a closed abortion facility in Birmingham. And this is where this all started. So there's a video of you, and we'll hopefully show the video. And it's had millions of views on Twitter, on social media. It's gone all around the world, and it has shocked people. Would you talk us through what happened on that day?
Yeah, so when I went to the abortion centre in December last year. So this was the 4th time I'd been inside the PSPO, the Public Space Protection Order zone, which is like a buffer zone that was created around the abortion centre. This is something brought in by the local police and council. So I went each time when the abortion centre was closed, and I just silently prayed by myself near the abortion centre. And on the 4th time that I was there, which was in December, police officers came and they asked me what I was doing there. I said I was just standing there. They asked if I was praying, and I said I might be silently praying, but nothing out loud. And that was when they arrested me. And I was searched on the public street, a very long search that went all through my hair, took everything out of my pockets, confiscated everything I had, including even tissues. And then I was taken in a police car half an hour away to a police station, put in a cell for a few hours, and then I was interviewed, interrogated, however you want to see it. And then I was released on bail. Subsequently, I was recalled from bail and told that I was being charged on 2 counts, well, on 4 counts, but with 2 things. I was being charged with protesting and engaging in an act which was intimidating service users. Now, I remind you, the abortion centre was closed when I was there, so how I could possibly be intimidating a service user is very confusing, and it kind of begs the question, who's intimidating who when something like that happens?
Mm-hmm. And I think the big thing for a lot of people is the fact that it was more or less, a thought crime. It was implied that this was a crime that when you admitted that you might be praying inside your head. And as you say, you weren't standing, blocking an entrance. I think this is what sort of comes across, is that you were not allowing women to access the building, but that's not actually the case. It was a case of you praying.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, as I say, there was nobody using the abortion facility. It was closed at the time. And when I was actually at the police station, when I was being interviewed under caution, they wanted to know what I had been thinking about, what I'd been praying about. And I even remember repeating that question back to them, because I was slightly incredulous that I was seriously being asked this in a police interview, but they said yes, that they wanted to know. So I had to tell them what I had been praying about when I'd been outside the abortion centre. And I was shown a series of photographs that locals had taken of me standing there. One, there was a photograph of me looking at my phone, a photograph of me with my hands in my pockets, another photograph of me with my hands not in my pockets. And these were supposed to be evidence of my silent prayers. It was just farcical. It really was. And I think to anybody, no matter what their religious beliefs or pro-life beliefs, should have concerns about this censorship on prayer or thought.
And would you say that this was a case of, as you mentioned, there are local people in the area like sort of raising the alarm, and this is how the police knew that you were there?
Yes, yeah. And I was read out statements when I was at the police station from locals who had given statements to the police. Yeah. So I know that they were the ones that obviously contacted the police. Statements that said they knew I was praying because I swayed slightly. It was actually because it was a cold day and I kind of moved from one foot to another to stop myself getting cold. But this was the, as I say, the so kind of evidence that was being put forward. And it's often the case that some of the locals who have maybe a different ideology would complain about us. Very rarely would it be actually anyone using the abortion centre, obviously when the abortion centre was open prior to the PSPO, when I'd been there. But yes, we do get some locals who very much seem to object to our presence in the area. We also get some who have been incredibly supportive, come out bringing us cups of tea, inviting us into their house and just offering us all kinds of support. But as is often the case, you have a vociferous minority that have, you know, maybe stirred up some difficulty in the area.
In terms of the treatment, Isabel, by police, you mentioned how they literally went through your hair, they confiscated tissues from your pocket. I mean, what was going through your head at that moment? Because it sounds pretty distressing.
It was actually quite surreal for me. And I think it's one of those things that you're almost sort of digesting afterwards. Obviously, I've seen the video afterwards, and it was almost looking at the video when it became kind of real for me. At the time, it did feel a very surreal experience, that I'd literally just been standing there, not engaging in any way with anyone. And yet here were police doing this extensive search all over my body and taking away everything out of my pockets. Obviously, when I get to the police station, you have to have your coat and your shoes taken as well. A religious chain I had around my neck was taken, because people were concerned about my thoughts. It was and still is just mind-boggling, and as I say, just really surreal at the time to be going through something like that.
And when you went and you were interrogated by the police and you were questioned, how did that sort of go? How did the conversation go?
So it was a reasonable length interview. As I say, one of the things that they particularly seemed to focus on was my thoughts, and I suppose there wasn't anything else for them to go on. There wasn't any actions for them to talk about. I hadn't engaged with anyone. I hadn't got any leaflets on me or anything else. But they did want to quiz me quite a bit about what I had been thinking about. And as I say, I was shown various photographs of myself, asked to identify myself in all the photographs. There seemed to be quite a few that had been taken on that day and on previous occasions when I'd been there. All photographs of me just standing silently next to a hedge. And yeah, I had to identify whether it was me in the photographs, which obviously I had. I did identify myself. And as I said, at the end of it, I was then released on bail, told not to return to the area.
I think one of the interesting things as well, when you have talked about your interaction with the police, was you sort of opened up and you said, look, this is why I'm at that abortion centre. I think a lot of people will struggle to understand why someone, you know, in their free time is going to stand outside in the cold, because you're not, you know, really going to get anything from that. But you were very much telling the police, look, I was doing this for women who I know who have been impacted by abortion, and you wanted to share that.
Well, that was my prayer intention. So when they asked me what I was thinking about, and what I'd been praying for, in a way it was an opportunity to share with them genuinely what I had been praying for, and is often what is on my mind when I'm there. So on that particular occasion, I'd been praying for people I know who've been impacted very negatively by abortion. So for instance, I shared with them I was praying for a very close friend of mine, Amy, who was raped and was pressured into having an abortion, which she deeply regretted afterwards. For another lovely young lady I know, Natalia, who took the abortion pills and ended up passing her child at home down the toilet and saw that child, which was terribly traumatic for her. And another lady, Kirsty, who also passed her child at home after taking the abortion pills. And when she lifted up the bed covers after she passed her child, she saw what she described as a scene from a horror movie. So I was praying for people like these that have gone through an absolute trauma because there were no other options presented to them. It wasn't that they chose abortion, but that they felt abortion was their only choice. So if we really believe in choice, how important is it that another option is presented to these women to at least give them that alternative if they should want it? And how tragic is it that those women are being denied just a last opportunity to have a real choice presented to them? And I know, you know, women and women like these who have said that they would have really welcomed just somebody to say, is there any help you'd like? Is there anything that we can do for you? You know, and I think with all of these women, they felt very pressured by those around them, whether it's men in their life or peer pressure. And it's so important to be able to talk to somebody who could maybe be a little bit more supportive in their situation, which is obviously something that we're very ready to do and have done to many women and couples. And just to add to that, one of the things that we are there for is for women who've had abortions. And I think sometimes people neglect to understand that so often we're talking to people who come out of the abortion centre, sometimes people who are almost immediately hurt because of it. Obviously not, that's not the case for every woman. But sometimes we're meeting women who are immediately feeling the impact of that. And we're able to direct them to where they can maybe find some healing or help that they might need. And that's really important, because a lot of the women who are part of our work, who are our volunteers and join us outside the abortion centre, are people who have themselves been through an abortion and very much know what it's like, and want to make sure that other women have the choices that they didn't.
You were charged with, I know those charges have been dropped, you were vindicated, but you were charged with 4 counts of breaching a public space protection order, which is a zone which is enforced by local councils, and I think it was enforced in Birmingham in September last, if I'm correct. Would you tell us a bit more about these zones?
Yeah, they're very concerning. So public space protection orders were first used for things like dog fouling or drunk and disorderly behaviour, so anything that was considered to be antisocial. And they're brought in with the council, local council and the police working together to implement this order. So the first one we saw around an abortion centre was in Ealing in London. And now we've got quite a few of them that have sprung up around the country. And as you say, Birmingham happened last year. And it was a case of some of the locals petitioning the council and the police, asking them to effectively get rid of us from the area. And it was really sad, because at the time the council had a so-called public consultation, which in my opinion was an absolute sham. And when we went along to a meeting with the council, we could see that they'd already decided exactly what was going to happen. As in, they decided there was going to be a PSPO, a buffer zone that was going to be brought in, and that there was no option really for us to be outside the abortion centre in any capacity anymore. And I remember going to that meeting and bringing along letters that had been given by women and couples that we'd supported who wanted their voice heard. And no one was interested. I wasn't even given an opportunity to read out or share even so much as a quote from any of these letters from mums that we had supported, from women who would be in a very difficult place if it hadn't been for the help that was offered them. And they're the people that I feel have really had their voice missing from this discussion. Women who very much felt we were approachable, certainly didn't feel intimidated or harassed in any way, but really welcome the opportunity of a friendly face and someone to talk to on the day.
How would you, Isabel, respond to those who say that a pro-life presence at an abortion facility could be perceived as intimidating or a breach of privacy for women that are going in, maybe experiencing clearly a very difficult time?
In a way, as I just mentioned, with the women that we've helped, they're the ones that would give that testimony. Clearly, if we were acting in any way that was intimidating or harassing, we wouldn't have the amount of women that we do speaking to us. I mean, I've had many women who've actually gone in for an abortion who've still thanked me profusely for being there, because it was just nice to have a friendly face. The whole point of us being there is we want to be approachable. So clearly we're not going to do anything that's going to stop or prevent women or couples from engaging in a conversation. Our campaign, like every other 40 Days for Life campaign, and to be honest, any other vigil that I know happening around the country, has a very strict code of conduct for anyone who joins, and they have to sign that prior to actively getting engaged with us and working with us. And this code would be that they have to behave peacefully, law-abidingly, lovingly. They don't use words like murder or murderer when they're talking to people. It's a very strict code that they would all adhere to ensure that all that the work that we do and all the help that we offer is done in a very sensitive and loving way. And as I say, many of the people who are part of our campaign have been through abortions. So of course they're not there to judge people. Of course they're there just to make sure that there really is another alternative available to everyone.
And Isabel, you faced those charges, they were later dropped. You decided to go ahead and you sought a judgment anyway, and you were vindicated. Would you tell us a bit about the judgment and that experience?
Yeah, so the charges were actually discontinued, which means that they reserved the right to continue them again at a future date if they so wanted. which is why I felt I needed to actually continue myself, because I was told that I also reserved the right to insist that the case continues. And I felt since they had started the case, it was important to actually have a proper conclusion to that, because having a case being discontinued isn't the same as being found not guilty at all. It just simply means that they've decided not to continue any further at that stage. So I decided it was important to continue, and we went to court. When we were in court, the prosecution were asked what evidence they had to present, and they said they had none. I was then obviously asked whether I was guilty or not guilty, and I said I was not guilty. And that was it. I was told I was not guilty. But the prosecution didn't offer a shred of evidence at all, and didn't even attempt to offer any evidence. So I was completely vindicated of all charges, alongside with a priest who was also being charged at the same time for the same offence as well, and he was completely vindicated as well, which was an absolute victory for common sense, and certainly what should have been happened. But as a lot of people have said, the process can become the punishment. The fact that I had to go through that, I had to go through the indignity of being searched and arrested on a public street, of having to go to court to have my name cleared. It is not something that I would want anyone to have to do. It's not a nice experience, apart from being incredibly time consuming. It's a difficult thing to have to go through. Thankfully, as I say, the judgment was exactly what we wanted, what we'd hoped for. But as we know, that's not the end, sadly.
Did you feel supported during that time, Isabel? I know, as you've said, it's very stressful. I think anything to do with something legal, it's stressful, it's very draining. Did you feel as though you had support? And I know you did bring your message to Parliament and you spoke to MPs.
I have to say, I was blessed with amazing support, so much support. So yes, I had support from a lot of MPs, who some of them I hadn't encountered or had any engagement with before, but who were on a personal level really supportive, which was so kind of them, I felt, to kind of personally take the time to connect with me. But so many messages pouring in from people who were saying, I don't agree with you on abortion, but I'm standing alongside you in this. Some people saying, I don't share your religious beliefs, I'm an atheist, but I have real concerns about this. Apart from obviously all the people who were saying, I'm standing alongside you in every way. I'm pro-life and I'm Christian and I can see the concerns. So just so many people, all around the world as well. I had letters, whether it was things being sent to me from America, messages from Spain or Japan, or all sorts flooding in, and it was just such an encouragement to see that solidarity that there exists. Sometimes we can feel quite alone in our own little pockets when we're doing pro-life work, but in actual fact there are so many people who recognize the value of the life in the womb, the damage that abortion does, and the importance of being able to witness to our faith, and clearly in this situation to be able to think freely. As I say, it's gone even further than religious or pro-life beliefs into what we should be able to think.
And despite being vindicated, despite that vindication and being found not guilty, you were once again outside the same abortion facility just a few days ago, and it happened again. You were once again arrested, is that correct?
Sadly, yes. And I have to say, I was really shocked that they would do pretty much exactly the same thing again. So I went there doing exactly the same, silently praying on exactly the same spot that I had previously been on, that I had been vindicated of, only weeks beforehand. And 6 police officers came with a police van to arrest me. And I was told that my prayers were an offence. When I disagreed that prayers were an offence, I was told that they were, quite emphatically, 3 times by an officer. And as I say, he arrested me, took me off to the police station, and again I was held there for a while, and I'm now on bail, awaiting to see what happens next. But how I could have been vindicated just weeks previously of exactly the same thing and found completely not guilty, and the prosecution offered no evidence whatsoever. And now, when I presume that that's fine then for me to do again, because I've been completely vindicated and was told I was not guilty, and yet they send 6 officers to arrest me. it is just so confusing, these PSPOs, and how they are being implemented, and just shocking that myself or other people are going to have to go through these kind of experiences. In a way, whatever the outcome, this shouldn't be what people are having to go through. It's just horrendous.
And really, what you said there, Isabel, was that the police told you, they informed you just a few days ago that silent prayer was an offence. So, I mean, really what we're seeing play out is we have advocates of these zones saying, well, this is about stopping intimidation, stopping whatever else. But in effect, what we're seeing is, thought being criminalised, prayer being criminalised. Would that be fair to say?
100%, yeah. And in the wording of the PSPO, it even mentions prayer. But one would presume that silent prayer would still be allowed, since that is surely one of our most basic rights. But yeah, hugely concerning. And I know some people have also said, well, I was somewhere that I shouldn't be. I think sometimes people think of a PSPO or a buffer zone like they do a restraining order, and that's not how it works. So a PSPO, or like a buffer zone, it doesn't ban people, it bans behaviour. So it bans protesting in that area. And I made it very clear to the police officers that I wasn't protesting. I've never had any desire to protest outside an abortion centre. I know some people do or might want to, but that's not something that I do and have ever done. So that was made abundantly clear to them, that I wasn't doing anything which was prohibited by the PSPO, and yet still, simply for my thoughts, I was arrested. And for people who were saying that's not why you're arrested, the police themselves were saying to me, your prayer is an offence. And my prayer had been silent, not manifested in any way. So clearly that has got to be my silent thoughts that I'm being arrested for. This is seriously where we're at the moment, and it's kind of unbelievable, really.
With regards to the protesting, I know you say you're engaged in prayerful vigils. It's not a protest. But I think what we're also seeing, and people have raised concerns, that certain protests are allowed and other protests aren't being allowed.
Yeah, and I think people should. This is why, people who've contacted me have said, I'm concerned, even though I don't share your beliefs, because clearly if this can be done about the abortion issue, which we know is a very controversial issue and quite polarised, if these zones can be brought in to censor people's thoughts to do with abortion today, then what will it be tomorrow? Will it be somebody's thoughts to do with something else? Whatever falls foul of popular opinion or certain parliamentarians who might be voting. So we really do, even if we're people who completely support abortion, we should still have real concerns about thought being criminalised. Because, is that really what constitutes a protest? Somebody's own private thoughts? That is really, really worrying, and something that we haven't seen in this country, if we have at all, for a long, long time, hundreds of years.
In terms of these zones, these are sort of something that's been introduced in recent years. Who's sort of been behind, these zones coming in? Has it been a push from politicians, from advocacy groups? Because, it's a huge change, and now, if I'm correct, there are proposals to bring this in nationally.
Yes, so just this week we've had it voted on in Parliament here in Westminster to do with national buffer zones. And clearly this is something that is happening. People are trying to silence the pro-life voice. And I say that because it's not the women who are going into the abortion centres. As I say, in fact, they too have been silenced. The amount of women that we've helped that nobody has asked to hear from. But we often find it is, abortion groups themselves which are encouraging and stirring up people to push for this. And it's certainly been supported by, sadly, many secular media outlets. The amount of lies that we've had printed about our campaign bear no resemblance whatsoever to anything we do. In fact, if I read them and believed them, I wouldn't want anything to do with the work that I do, because it's just bears no resemblance to what actually really goes on. But yes, there's a push from certain areas, and just to say that, when people bring in these buffer zones, like as has happened in Birmingham, we now go and pray outside the buffer zone. So my 40 Days for Life campaign prays outside the PSPO, which is barely even in sight of the abortion centre. It's actually outside a nearby church. So there's 2 or 3 people quietly praying outside a nearby church. And guess what? Those locals that didn't want us outside the abortion centre, they still don't want us there. So my volunteers, who were just 2 or 3 people quietly saying their prayers outside the church, because they're pro-life, they're still being threatened and spat at and abused and having their property stolen on a regular basis. So we do have to realise that this isn't, even those who are pushing for it know that it's not women that are being intimidated or threatened outside abortion centres. It's just a total intolerance of an ideology which is different to their own, and that's very concerning.
Another point with regards to that is I've heard pro-life advocates make the point in response to the claims over intimidation and whatnot that legislation is already in place to deal with incidents that do crop up, and actually this, that legislation's there, but in reality, as you say, a lot of the time it's maybe older people, retired people who are out there praying, and it's very different sometimes to what we hear.
Yeah, I mean, I would say actually with our particular campaign in Birmingham, we're really blessed to have such a wide range of ages and demographics that are involved in it. We just got a lovely, quite a few students that have joined up. You couldn't meet a nicer bunch. As I say, that all of the same mindset, really want to offer that help. And clearly have every intention of offering help and support to women. They're not there to, make anything more difficult. And even amongst these young people, some of them are people who've already been affected and impacted by abortion. And that's why they want to get involved and offer those real alternatives to people who are in those difficult situations. And I know we talk about how there already are existing laws to deal with harassment and intimidation, but it's interesting that they've never had to be recourse to, because we don't have harassment and intimidation going on. Yes, if there was, there would be laws to deal with it. But I have never seen any evidence of that happening in this country. Just in Parliament this week, we heard stories by MPs of pro-lifers live streaming videos of women going into an abortion centre. And yet this has never, ever happened. People just make things up out of clean air, and it mud sticks. People end up repeating these things and it's believed. Of course, nobody would ever have any intention of videoing women going into the abortion centre on live stream. And that would already, as you say, be an illegal offence and an invasion of somebody's privacy. So yes, there's laws already for that, but those laws don't need to be recourse to because it isn't happening.
And I mean, some of our investigations at Gript have shown that there have been lies that have been told by abortion advocates in order to further an agenda of introducing these zones. And just as like what you've spoke of, at the minute in Ireland, of course, there is a huge push for the censorship zones, buffer zones. They're sort of referred to as safe access zones. In Northern Ireland, these became law, I think, about a month ago, and it was backed by, politicians, for example, the SDLP, which would be sort of historically seen as a pro-life party, and all of the sort of Republican parties. But what would your message be to Irish politicians and maybe people who are reading these articles and think, well, this is a good idea and we want these zones? Because you're someone who has seen, I suppose, firsthand the impact of this.
Yeah, I just wish that somebody would actually go and look at what is really happening. I mean, what the work that we do is in the public eye, or all of it, we're there for 12 hours a day doing our voluntary work outside the abortion centres or outside the buffer zones where we are at the moment. But it's something that anyone could come and observe. Anyone could just quietly sit in their car nearby and see what was going on, or walk past and see if they were approached, see if anyone says anything to them. If people have concerns, it would be so easy to go and see if those concerns were a reality. So that would be my advice to anyone, really. Go and see what is really happening. Before any of these buffer zones actually come into place, go to yourself and find out what is really happening outside the abortion facility or the abortion referral agency or wherever it might be that this work is happening, and actually meet those people. Because I can tell you, I couldn't meet a nicer bunch of people than the ones involved in the work that I do. I mean, just a while ago, we had somebody, a couple that were wanting help who'd had one of our leaflets offered them. in the most difficult situations, and they were thousands of pounds in debt, not through their own fault. I won't go into the details, but it was a really horrible situation that they'd got into. And they needed so much help and support, whether they needed legal support, they needed stuff for their house, obviously stuff for the upcoming baby that was due. And I only had to put an email out to my volunteers. And in just such a short space of time, we had thousands of pounds come flooding in to cover these people's debts and more, and to give them everything that they needed. And it was from people who could ill afford it themselves, but because they so passionately believe what so many pro-lifers believe, that we pledge to offer whatever is needed for a woman or a couple to continue their pregnancy and beyond for as long as they need it. I mean, I know in London, where the organisation, the Good Counsel Network, that do this work, prior to the buffer zones coming in, I think they were giving like about £40,000 in aid to women or couples in difficult situations that they were supporting, who they'd met outside abortion centres. What's happening instead of that? Instead of that, these women are having an abortion and they're still in those difficult financial situations. So please listen to those women that really are the ones in the difficult situations, the ones that have had those difficult pregnancies, the ones that have been able to accept the help, and listen to what it was really like for them, rather than presuming that when often what you're hearing is from people who've never been in that situation, and maybe have just got a different ideology themselves.
From what you're saying, it is quite clear there is a whole different dimension, a different side of this that we don't really hear from a lot of media outlets, perhaps. I just want to ask finally, Isabelle, what is next for you? Because obviously you have this on your hands again.
So clearly at the moment I have to wait and see, whether I am charged. At the moment I'm on bail and I'm not even allowed to go and join my vigil, even though it's outside the PSPO. I've been banned from that. So I have to wait and hear what I'm told by the police, whether they are going to charge me or not. But if we have laws that are saying that prayer is an offence, then we must never, ever believe that. And we must never feel intimidated by those laws. Our prayers can never, ever be classed as an offence. And in fact, if laws are saying that prayer is an offence, then the offence is in itself in that law. And we are never duty bound to stop our prayers, particularly when we're talking about silent prayers. That is one of our most fundamental rights. And as Christians or as people of goodwill, we must be prepared to stand firm and stand up for them.
Thank you, Isabelle. It's been great to talk to you.
Oh, it's a blessing. Thank you very much.